Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank, Chase Commercial Term Lending. Additional support is provided by Briarwood Organization, Bruce Mosler, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, Chelsea Lighting, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova Burns and Gian Tomasi, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Wickoff Group, Urban American, and Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Ariel Property Advisors, Eastern Consolidated, Essex Capital Partners, Goldman Properties, Moynihan Group, Muss Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Rosewood Realty Group, Terra CRG, Triangle Equities.
People want to find homes. New York City is too expensive today for young people to live. So where are they going to go? Maybe they're going to go out to Long Island. But there's a housing problem in Long Island. So today I've brought together 4 individuals who are going to provide their insight on how to solve the housing problem in Long Island. My guests today include the Honorable Paul Pontieri, the mayor of the village of Patchogue, Chris Caprice, who's the Senior Development Director at Avalon Bay Communities, Mike Kelly, who's a partner at Rose Kelly Associates, and last but not least, the Planning Commissioner for the town of Brookhaven, Tullio Bartoli. So, Planning Commissioner, now I have 2 guys who left, public work to go to work for the government. What's happening in the town of Brookhaven and in Nassau County and Suffolk County with regard to taking care of maybe getting people like Chris to move out there? How are we handling this problem?
Well, I think that what's really happening is something societal-wise, that we have 2 demographics. We have Generation Y, kids in our 20s, who are looking for entry into the housing market, and then we have baby boomers who want to downsize. They represent 50% of our population. And the problem is that their housing needs are aligned and they're satisfied by multifamily housing. However, there's a cultural and a generational battle that seems to be going on in any township where you have public hearings and rezonings to that effect, so that the new suburbia wants to define itself with this model, perhaps in much the same manner that Levitt defined it out in the Hempstead Plains many years ago. That was defined as a single-family model. So I think what's happening now is that we're really looking and groping to see how our housing needs are going to be resolved in the future.
Now, how many years are you in Patchogue, personally?
Personally, my whole life.
So you grew up in Patchogue?
Grew up in Patchogue.
And you own a house in Patchogue?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you decided there must have been an aberration of something over there that you wanted to become, the mayor. You're a baby boomer. Who's going to buy your house?
Well,
what young person is going to have the money to pay you the money to buy your house? And who's moving out to Patchogue or Brookhaven or, to Calverton or other parts?
Well, I think 2 parts to that question. The who are the ones that we want to stay. Not necessarily that they're moving out to Patchogue. There's a whole population that's leaving, and the attempt is to keep that population locally. And sometimes we do things on our own enlightened self-interest, as Bob Coughlin from TriTech would always say. We have a number of large developments going on, one being the Rose Kelly development, which is 163 market townhouses. We have about $100 million project going on with 291 rentals right in the center of our downtown. And these are homes for that younger generation, but they're also homes for a guy like myself when I'm ready to sell my house, that maybe one of these people there will purchase that property.
Now, Paul, are these for sale units?
We've tried to mix it up. We have the 291 units for the redevelopment in our downtown with 40,000 square feet of retail and office space. They're rentals. The development done by Rose Kelly are for sales. Copper Beach, which is a 80-unit Pulte development, were for sale units. We have a development called Art Space, which is live and workspace for artists. It's 45 units of rentals, and it's affordable, done through tax credits. All of it to bring that energy and the change of the. Patchogue has always been a place of transition.
But we were talking prior to the show. Patchogue has 12,000 people. Town of Brookhaven has 500,000. I mean, maybe what you're doing in Patchogue is great, but Chris, with Avalon Bay, a major REIT, has gone through so much problem throughout the island to get approvals. I mean, let's talk about some of that.
Well, I think broadly, right now we're in a pretty actually strong period of development for Avalon Bay personally. We have two developments going on right now. One is a transit-oriented development in Rockville Center, 349 units right at the train station. For those of you who know Rockville Center, it's a great destination downtown, and we only have a handful of them on Long Island, really, right? Huntington, Rockville Center, Patchogue.
Train station, convenience to the city, 40 minutes on the Long Island Railroad. Very important.
Within walking distance of the downtown as well. We hit all the major points for a transit-oriented development, and it's well-situated density, 50 units to the acre.
But how many years did it take?
It took about 9 years, including a legal process as well.
So that's one development. Where's the other development?
The other one is in Garden City. It's on Stewart Avenue in Garden City, right in the Mitchell Field hub. And it's got great vehicular access because, yes, transit-oriented development is important for Long Island, and it's part of what we're trying to do here. But also, it's Long Island. It's a vehicular community. So with great vehicular access to the Meadowbrook Parkway, the LIE, the Northern State, as well as the surrounding areas.
And both of them are rentals.
Both of them are rentals.
Okay. Now, Mike, you have on the other side, you're in the village of Patchogue with one, and then you have another.
We have another one in the town of Brookhaven.
Okay, so let's talk about both of them and their convenience to transportation and what they are, the type of housing.
Both communities are redevelopments, so there were existing businesses on both sites, and that I think is a big push to overcome some of the civic objections. But the product.
What kind of developments were they?
One was the one in Patchogue Village was the old Claire Rose Distribution Center. It was about 125,000 square feet warehouse. A lot of parking, a lot of asphalt, not the best looking buildings per se. So this redevelopment that we came to the table with for 163 townhomes is really cleaning up a blight, let's say. And it's that type of diversification of the housing stock that will bring and attract that younger generation to say, you know what, you can afford that. We can meet your down payments. Your monthly payments are probably comparable to what Chris is putting out in his rental product, if not maybe a little bit lower due to the interest rates right now. So we've got a community in the village of Patchogue, which is great. And the next community that we'll go into is in the town of Brookhaven, which is it was an old driving range. And we knocked down the driving range, so I don't know how good my scores will come out this year. I think the golfing gods may be against me, but it's 126 homes that are flats, 1-over-1 units and some townhomes.
Now, which one is the one that's right near the access to fire?
The one in Patchogue Village, we are 1 block to downtown Patchogue, we're 1 block to the train station, and we're a block and a half to the Fire Island ferries.
And how long is the train ride from Patchogue into Manhattan?
About an hour and 35 minutes.
So it's a long commute, but it's commutable, as one would say.
It's commutable, but a lot of people don't even make it all the way into Manhattan because there's other points along the way that people are working in different
So, but
employment
here's
corridors.
my question: how do you attract? Because I was trying to say, and I said this in my symposium the other day, rents in Manhattan are as high as $90. I mean, it's very expensive. You really have to make a lot of money to be living in Manhattan. So you go to Queens, it's still there, and there's Brooklyn, there's still over there in rents. How do you attract your son and other people who are in their 20s and 30s, and that's what you have to attract also, to move out to Long Island? I mean, there are certain nice things. You have the parks, you have the community, you have opportunities. And you were saying before there are restaurants and there are other amenities.
It's the vibrancy of downtown.
Tulio?
Well, I think what you try to do is have your jobs creation and your planning work hand in hand. And we've done this in the AVR project to work in conjunction with Brookhaven National Labs, 850 units. There's 1 million square feet of what will be incubator space in conjunction with the lab. And you're creating a vibrant downtown there. We're also doing it in our Ronkonkoma Hub project. So you always try to create a little bits of urbanity, if you will.
Why don't you talk about Brookhaven Labs and what you're saying with business and housing?
Because the two go hand in hand. And
No, I agree with you, but I want you to explain the two projects.
Well, the AVR project was part of a program with Mark Lesko initiated, Accelerate Long Island, to use our universities, Brookhaven National Labs, and others to create startup companies. And that project and some others that we've been working on are to work in conjunction with that. So that in fact, what you're asking is what would attract someone to Long Island. It's obviously jobs, a vibrant kind of environment to live in, and rental housing that is affordable. And those are the three components.
Now, we were also saying, you were on a symposium with me a couple of weeks ago. One of the problems with provincial state of market in Long Island is that people and town and planning and the community is adverse to anything which is over 3 stories high. Why?
Well, maybe you want.
Yeah, when we make presentations to civics or to town boards, that's exactly in their mind because people don't want to be like Brooklyn. People don't want to be like Queens. People moved out from Brooklyn and Queens to Suffolk County to say, you know what, I don't want it to be like...
You see, there are different life cycles of individuals. Somebody is born, somebody goes to school, somebody goes to, gets a job, somebody then retires, and then there's the almighty situation. Unless, they won't have to worry about the 3-story because they'll be taking into the cemetery nearby if there's no planning.
Who's going to take them there?
That's exactly right. There'll be no one to take them there in that situation. Why is this? I mean, you're a hardworking guy and you've accomplished a lot in the village. Why can't these people have the foresight? What's wrong with a 4-story? I go around the country. I've seen, even in Colorado, where people are this. There's nothing wrong with a nice, well-planned 5-story. Avalon Bay does it all over.
We do. Actually, in the Long Island Index, there was one interesting stat that was there in the 1950s on Long Island. The average square foot per home was 983 square feet, right? In 2010, it's 2,700 square feet. What does that 983 square feet sound like? It sounds like what we're building. That's addressing the need here on Long Island, where, at Avalon Rockville Center, for instance, over 50% of our residents are under the age of 35. We're addressing the need with that community. That's a staggeringly high number.
Yeah, but it's interesting. We talk about the good projects, but we haven't spoken about the projects that have been turned down. Why have they been turned down?
Because ostensibly, I think that our planning needs to be somewhat overhauled. When we talk about comprehensive planning, what we really try to do is try to anticipate every future event that could possibly occur, and that leads to kind of a paralysis of analysis. And I think that the way cities grow, and certainly the way Paul has done it successfully in Patchogue, is incrementally. That our planning should perhaps be much more policy driven. Our code should be a lot more flexible. I know we're trying to do that in Brookhaven. So as opportunities come up, you take advantage of them. And Paul did not start out with a grand master plan 8 years ago, but during that time, he just built upon the status quo and had enough flexibility in his codes that allowed the public policy makers to make those decisions. However,
He also had less people in the government. He was able,
Yes, that's
smaller amount of
Right.
voices
Very close.
to open their mouth and able to control or help control the element.
I guess I'm suggesting that our planning needs to be looked at in a different manner, and certainly, as I said, that's something that we're doing in Brookhaven, much more progressive.
Mike?
I think there's two major elements that the Village of Patchogue and the mayor and his administration have to their betterment. One is sewer, right? Sewer allows us to develop to greater densities than what's allowed under existing.
How did this small 12,000 community afford to build sewers when these big places?
The other component is political courage, and he's got them both, and I'll let him talk to both of them because he's got a
So
great
how
mind.
do you get the money to build sewers? How do you get this accomplished?
I always say that I'm the lucky guy because there were mayors before me that did a bunch of things. The first sewer system was put in, there was one of those flush and float, it flushed and it floated out to the bay. But that was in 1929, so the infrastructure was put in place. In the 50s and 60s, there were mayors that preserved 30 acres of parkland on the water, created 2,000 parking spaces in the downtown. The mayor that decided to take a plant that was 100,000 gallons and make it 500,000 gallons, Norman Electric. A mayor that took an old dilapidated theater and created a 1,200-seat performing arts center. Guys before me that kind of laid things out. But you talk about, the sewer. I got into a battle with Senator Schumer over sewer money because it was promised, taken back, and he finally had it restored for us, where we ended up with $7.2 million worth of stimulus money and DEC money to be able to upgrade our plant to 800,000 gallons. It is truly that keystone of what happens in the village. You take that out, and nothing else happens. But just very quickly back, the development we're putting on the Four Corners is a 5-story building. It's not a 2 or 3, it's 5
What
stories.
happened? I mean, Mecca has arrived.
It's the political courage that Paul and his administration had to follow that through.
Now, but besides that, we were talking, I think Tulio brought it up over there, is that it's a live-work community in many of these new developments. You're having the opportunity, of housing, of some retail, of restaurants, and other amenities to make people happy.
Sure. I mean, throughout Long Island, we're seeing it more and more. And again, some of those hubs in Avalon Bay certainly does it in some areas throughout the country. More urban areas here, down on Houston, Avalon Christie Place, we have 2-story Whole Foods with residential above. And that's something that we do often throughout the urban areas.
Now, we were talking 2 weeks ago about, when development takes so many years, and I had met Mike when he was in a different life. He was at Pulte, another public company, and we were talking that Archstone moved out of Long Island and Pulte moved out of Long Island. They moved out of Long Island because of the problem of getting things accomplished. I mean, that's a scary situation.
It's very scary. If you look at our supply and demand imbalance, I think in 2011, between Nassau and Suffolk counties, maybe we issued 1,000 new permits. We're a land of 3 million people. Just to replace our existing stock, we should be replacing at least 1% of our housing stock. That's 10,000 permits. We haven't issued 10,000 permits as by county area in, I don't know, 15, 20 years.
I've heard a lot of things about housing, but what I haven't heard from any of you, and I remember when you were on the show a number of years ago and we were talking about it, the age-restricted housing. And I was saying, I'm really, I wouldn't want to live in an age-restricted community because I want to see young people and I want to be vibrant over there. But many of the towns and the villages in Nassau and Suffolk County went with age-restricted because the community didn't want schools.
That's correct.
What's happening today with the age restricted? Are there new age restricted being built?
Well, I think that there's, again, this battle that's waging out there, and a lot of it has to do with misinformation about the number of school kids that are generated in multifamily housing.
Cost of them, and the cost of them.
Yes, and also politically, it's perhaps much more viable if one does 91 bedroom units, however insane that might sound, rather than changing the bedroom count and uncovering civic opposition against it. So developers take the path of least resistance relative to that. And it is a systemic problem that we have as projects come forward.
So I mean, in the town of Brookhaven, have there been any new age restricted 55 and older
No,
recently?
not really. We don't look to that end. Look, if you approach the housing problem, it isn't going to be one solution that's going to resolve it. You know, we've never been really good at coming up with planning models that resolve the housing crisis. In fact, I'm reminded of the old Yiddish expression that says, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your future plans. And by that I mean that Corbusier, in 1925, the housing crisis is going to be solved by ripping out north of the Seine a section of Paris and replacing it with 60-story towers. That created a model for urban renewal, which was devastating. And then Frank Lloyd Wright wanted to create Broadacre City, where everybody had an acre of land, and the car dominated, and that created sprawl. So today the housing crisis is going to be solved by a multitude of different approaches, not just restricting age. Accessory dwelling ordinances, even defining what the family is in single-family residence. And so I think that we have to look at a different kind of approach.
Mike?
Some of the 55 and older communities that have been approved over the past 3 to 5 years, a lot of those developers have actually gone back to the municipalities and asked for relief. Relief from 55 and older to some units being 48 and older. Relief from those that were 62 and older down to 55 and older for a portion of the units. So I think developers are starting to see that, you know, it's a slower process to move that product because the buyer has to still sell their house.
That's correct. I mean,
So
that's
trickled
that's
down.
the biggest problem. I mean, a lot of these communities, you know, you haven't been able to sell homes in Long Island or anywhere in the country. It's not only, you know, it's not something just for the region. You haven't been able to sell homes. Now, I have progressive people over here. You've had problems in certain of your developments. Why are we having difficulties in, I mean, look, Calverton is a good example. Then what's the swamp
Commerce River.
What was that?
Carmen's River?
Commons River.
The Carmen's River plan.
What happened in Commons River?
Well, the Carmen's River plan was a way to protect 20,000 acres of our watershed by transferring development out. And I felt it appropriate to move it into those commercial corridors that were previously developed where the retail model has failed. The pushback was from the communities who did not want receiving sites, multifamily sites in their district. They wanted to preserve the river, but by the same token, they didn't want it.
And what about Pilgrim State? I mean, the other, isn't that a different?
Heartland,
The Heartland.
different municipality.
And what's happening there? Chris?
I think that the developer has actually been going through, you know, an approval process now for
8 years?
about 8-9 years, yeah. And
I mean, we're sitting here with, you know, if you take certain places like Pilgrim State, which is a large facility, a large situation, the Calverton, the old military base over there, these are places that you can do things. You can build housing. You can make a mixed community. But why aren't these happening?
Well, I mean, you know, Tullio just talked about some planners and some planning principles, and we're talking about, I mean, all of us here are talking about more efficient land use, right? What's the kind of the overarching problem here is that less than 1% of the existing land is zoned for multifamily housing on Long Island. So you have to go through a discretionary
How many
approval
more
every time.
you know, you were at my symposium yesterday. Kimco, nobody's building new shopping centers. It's not something that everybody wants, a new shopping center. At one time, that was that was in vogue in Long Island, new shopping centers. You don't need another one. You don't need another Tanger outlet in the middle of Calverton or something like that.
Well, but I think Mike hit on it. I think we know what the issues are and how to even address them. We've always been very good at designing little villages, for example. But I think what we lack is the implementation component. And we lack people of courage, like Paul, like my supervisor, Mark Lesko. And they are the driving force that allow you to break through a lot of the NIMBYism that occurs.
So where does a developer like you go next? I mean, because I have 2 developers and I have 2 civil servants, community leaders. Where do you go next to get something to build? Where would you go?
Right.
Especially since you know as one would say, the service and the fighting to get something accomplished. And
you try to go to areas that need the redevelopment, right? Where civics and special interests are going to welcome you with open arms, because it does make the process that much more efficient, and you go from 3 years to 1 year, let's say, like we did with Tulio in the town of Brookhaven. So you go to spots like maybe a Farmingville or a Wyandanch or a Ronkonkoma, where it's just crying for something to redevelop, because you can give it a good shot in the arm for a tax base. You can maybe build your own sewers that can revitalize an area, and you build new. You create something new, and that's what Paul did in the village. When we first got to the village 8 years ago, you wouldn't go down some of the streets that we redeveloped. But you know what? We went down the street, we knocked on doors, we made deals, and we redeveloped after assembling entire blocks.
what's happening with the idea of MacArthur Airport for additional changes?
Well, we're working in conjunction with ISLIP through our Ronkonkoma Hub project. That project envisions a mixed-use community on the Brookhaven side of the train track. And then ISLIP is working with us to upgrade some of the facilities on the westerly portion of the airport. There's been talk about some more distinct connection with the airport, whether through a trolley or perhaps a light rail component. But that particular project we're excited about because it has access to the LIE, to the trains, and the airports, a perfect synergy.
I mean, MacArthur Airport, especially when you have the difficulties of going to LaGuardia or Kennedy. I mean, it's such a wonderful change of environment, and it's a great airport, and you get in and out quickly, and you have that opportunity. So it's a total situation. Long Island has such great amenities and certain great environment. It's good that I've had people here today who are trying to change the environment and trying to solve the housing problem. I'd like to thank the Honorable Paul Pottieri, the mayor of the village of Patchogue, Chris Caprice, Avalon Bay Communities, Mike Kelly, Kelly Rose, and Tulio Bartoli. See you next week.